Hi, I'm John. Thanks for coming to my talk about artichokes. So first we're going to say, like, artichokes, what is this talk actually about? It's usability. Then about why usability is so important for internal tools, a little bit of a process for how you can work on the usability of your products, and then we'll go through some specific techniques that you can use along the way. And finally, different ways to get your functionality to your users, and then at the end I'll kind of say the whole thing again because that's what you do. A little bit note about terminology. I'm going to say product and customer and user. By product, I mean whatever it is that you're building, even if it's internal, kind of especially if it's an internal tool. And customer, again, I mean probably the people around you, but whoever it is that's using your thing. I know all the PMs in the room are cringing right now, but that's okay. Neat. Okay, so API is UX. This is an idea that's kind of been around a little bit. And basically what it means is that when you're developing things for other developers, those developers are your users. And using an API is an experience. Here at New Relic, we care a lot about user experience for good reason, and we should care equally about API design. Oh, and by the way, the so easy an artichoke could do it. What's that about? Well, artichokes aren't very bright. So if your product is so easy an artichoke could use it, then hopefully it's also easy enough for a software engineer. So why do we actually think that's important? Why is usability so important when we're building internal things? You could just walk over to their team and help them out in person, right? Well, first, friction is a word we've heard a lot lately, and for great reason. Friction is something that slows you down. It costs you time that you could be spending building your own great products. If I have to be struggling with some other team's tooling that I don't understand, I'm not fixing bugs. I'm not delivering value. So we want to eliminate friction. Moreover, in this post-singularity world we all inhabit now, teams often don't have to use products they don't like. They might be able to roll their own version of it. They might just decline to use that functionality, which costs everybody a lot of time. And even if they don't have a choice in the matter, even if they have to use your product, do you really want them to be using your product if it's really a big struggle? No, you care about people's happiness. So usability is important because you care about the people around you. From a pragmatic standpoint, the multiplier on this work is huge. You probably get back a good portion of the time that you spent polishing usability every single time another team uses your product. If it's just one team, okay. Maybe one team you do. You just go over, you help them out, you go on with your life. But if 2 or 3 teams are going to use your product, it's worth spending a little time. 5 or 6 teams, the whole company, it adds up really fast. It is almost always worth taking the time to do it right. But the most important reason, for me at least, to work on your usability is because you're a professional. You build great products. You build great things. That's why you work at a company like New Relic. I didn't pick this company by accident. I believe that it is worth spending the time to build amazing things to help everyone else around you do the amazing things that they're doing. That's how you have the biggest multiplier on what you do, the biggest effect on the world. So, how do we actually create usable products? What's a good process to go through? Let's take a hypothetical example. Not too hypothetical, because all I'm saying is that you're building a service. Most of us are. And in this particular case, we're going to call it the color service. The color service keeps track of users' favorite color. Obviously, that's incredibly important. Everybody in the company is going to need this, so we need it to be very usable. To test the integration process, we need some dummy app that will use your color service. Let's call that the Artichoke app. And again, the Artichoke app is just a generic dummy app, and it's just kind of the simplest, kind of realistic application that you could possibly start with. I made one here. It's just a Rails app, serves up an ASCII artichoke. Lovely. And this is going to have like a few models, a few relationship, just all the stuff that you expect a real client application to have when they try to use your product, including tests. Don't forget the tests. That's something that often gets left out. Now that you've got the Artichoke app, you throw in a Git repo, and you just keep it handy. By the way, we do have a lot of languages here at New Relic, so it might make sense to make a couple of these, a Java 1, a Ruby 1, bonus points for Elixir, I don't know, stuff like that. Yeah. And I want to be clear, I'm mentioning a lot of kind of app names I'm throwing out there. The color service, that's just a hypothetical example to illustrate the process. That's not a real thing, just this is whatever it is that you're building. But the Artichoke app is a real thing. I want you to actually build an Artichoke app. I want to see repos called artichoke_app in people's GitHub. So once you have that, what do you actually do with the Artichoke app? Okay, the process from here has somewhere between 6 and infinity steps. We start with step 1, clone the Artichoke app repo. This one is pretty straightforward. You just now have a local copy of it. Step 2, you want to make a branch to work on the integration with your awesome product. So in this particular case, our hypothetical example, you might call it integrate color service. This is your base point. Get used to this directory being in this state because you're going to come back here a lot of times. Step 3, and this is the meat of the process. You're going to actually integrate your product with the Artichoke app. Like in this example, we might say we're going to look up the user's favorite color, and we're going to make the artichoke be that color. So you go through and you actually make that happen. And at each step along the way, you want to ask yourself some questions. And at each step, I mean like every time your fingers touch the keyboard, you want to ask yourself, how did I know to do that? Is it just because I wrote this so I know this is the next step? That's not a good answer. Is it in a README? Did something tell me? How did you know? How could you make that step easier? How could you make it require less special knowledge? How could you make it fewer steps? How could you make it easier in any way? Or even better than that, actually, how could you eliminate that step completely? And I want to point out here that I'm not saying, can you eliminate that step completely? I'm saying, how can you do it? Because there is almost always some way that you could do it. Whether it's worth it or not in every case, that's a question. Like maybe you would have to hard code a value, maybe you have to implement a bunch of logic that's too complicated, not worthwhile. But you should actually ask yourself the question, think about like what actually would it take to eliminate this step? Because a lot of times you might be surprised it's actually something you could totally do. And that's a point that applies to all of these questions. I want you to actually stop, ask yourself the questions, and think about what the answer is. I know that sounds perhaps a little bit hokey, but it's kind of like magic, right? Actually stop and thinking about the answers to the questions is going to break through a lot of those unconscious biases you might have in your head where you just assume that this is the way it had to work. But if you think about it, maybe not. This is a great thing to do with a pair. So you can do it as a pairing exercise, kind of go through the integration process, great onboarding thing. And as you're going, you want to keep notes. Like write down, what are all these steps? How could I make this easier? How could I eliminate this step? But one thing you do not want to do is commit any of those integration steps. And I know, because I've been there, that you will be tempted. You will be there, and you'll be like, oh my God, I have to do all these things. It's the same thing every time. I've done this 12 times. I'm just going to commit this step so I can skip this. It'll make the process go faster. Don't do it. If you're tempted to commit a step because it's getting frustrating, use that frustration as a guide, because that means that step should be easier. So focus on it. Every time you come back, do it. And think to yourself, how can I make this easier? Or how can I make this easier? Because you'll be very motivated after a while. And again, don't forget to write tests in that Artichoke app for your new functionality. Like, if the color service says it's red is the favorite color, write a test. Make sure the artichoke turns red. Excuse me. All right, step 4. Go actually do all those things. Look at your notes. Make all those changes that you had. Great. Your product is now harder, better, faster, stronger. But our work is never over because now we have to go blow away all those changes and do it again. Just git, reset, hard head, just the whole thing, nuke and pave, start from scratch, and implement the whole thing all over again. And then do it again, and again, and again. And when this stops being a gigantic pain in your butt, you're done. Congratulations, you now have an artichoke-ready product. Along the way, though, yeah, woo! I kind of waved my hands. I kind of said, like, make it easier, make it better, right? But I didn't really tell you how to do that. So let's talk about some specific techniques that you can use. Bare minimum, if you do nothing else, at least write down the steps that it took. And not the ones in your head, not the ones that you think it would take if you didn't actually do it, because you forgot at least 3 things. Actually go through the steps, write each one down, and put all that in the README. Better than writing it down, though, is to automate the installation process. Just write a custom script or a generator or something to do some of that work for the user so that they don't have to do it. As you're doing that, have the scripts tell them what the next steps are so that they don't have to go look at the README to know what to do next. Maybe you could set some reasonable defaults for things like config values that you would otherwise have to go put in a config file or set somewhere. Pardon? API keys, exactly. And when I say defaults, usually that does mean configs, but it can be implementations, like in the login service client. We have a way, there's a default way to get the current user back, but you can also override it with your own implementation of getting a user, because a lot of apps have their own user models. Don't forget a test mode. People are going to write tests that use your product. So you need to have an easy way for clients to stub out your calls to your awesome product in their tests. Relatedly, you don't want to forget a local dev mode. People are going to want to run this thing on their laptop. So have some easy way for them to do that. A good way that Ron Crocker put into the feature flag service is he's got a local YAML file that you can use to override the values you get back from the service. Client knows, just looks at that file, no problem. And finally, the best thing you can possibly do is to watch somebody else work through the process of installing your product, because that will really reveal all those unconscious biases that did not even occur to you when you were doing it yourself. All right, so what are some of the different ways you've got your awesome color service? How can we get that functionality to the people who need it? There's a few different options here. Client libraries are usually going to provide the smoothest, richest experience for the user. For example, our color service client might have a custom color model that would return like the RGB values and like the English name of this color. Maybe it's got a method that would take some text and give you back with the markup to render the text in that color. Whatever kind of stuff, anything that your clients, you think most of them are going to have to implement, you just implement it for them, and they don't have to do it. The downside of that is that here at New Relic, we have a lot of languages. Like 3 years ago, maybe we could have said Java, Ruby, you're done. Today, not so much. We have some Node, we've got Elixir, we've got Go, we've got Python maybe. We've got a lot of stuff around here, more stuff coming all the time. It might still be worth writing some clients in Java and Ruby in certain cases, especially like security-sensitive stuff. But if you're going to do that, make sure you also at least work through the steps once for languages that don't have a client, just so that you know what to tell them they're going to have to implement themselves. So flip side, you could provide a service API. And by API in this case, I mean like a web service API, not like, I know client libraries have APIs too. But those are good because they're language agnostic. It doesn't matter what language your client is in. That's good. But the downside of that is that you can't provide needed functionality, which means that you end up with inconsistent implementations. Color service, maybe who cares? That's fine. Not a big deal. RGB values might be a little different. Not great, but not disastrous. But for more security-sensitive things like permissions, for example, that could have serious repercussions. I've got a pop quiz for you too. Who thinks they know how to tell if a current user, or if a given user, is allowed to see the data for a given account? The answer is almost nobody. Because A, that's not enough information. You have to know how they logged in. And B, I've looked at the product code for a bunch of different products that were doing this, and not a single one ever got it right, except for RPM, which kind of doesn't count. But that's a serious problem, like, right? That's a problem. One last point about APIs, just use HTTP. There are other options. There are legitimate reasons why you need to use some kind of binary protocol on occasion, but most teams are going to be a little miffed if they end up having to use something other than just JSON HTTP or GraphQL. I have a confession for you, actually, though. I lied. A few slides back, I told you an untruth. The smoothest integration process is not a library. The smoothest possible integration process is to build your product into the infrastructure that we have here at New Relic so that it disappears completely. And this is especially true if your product is tricky to use correctly or securely. For example, you remember that account ID stuff? Are you allowed to see this data? Nobody ever got that right, so we built it into the service gateway. If you're not familiar with the service gateway, it's something that wraps calls to other services. The most common use case for it right now, it handles all login service integration for you, so you get that for free. And in addition, if you tell it what the account ID is, how to tell the account ID for a request, it will do that check for you. It will check to see if that user is allowed to see that data. That means that if you're using the service gateway, you get that for free. You don't have to know how to do it. You should probably be aware that it's happening, but you don't have to know the details, and you're not going to get it wrong. It's a big deal, yeah, right? And that's not, like, we could build anything into the service gateway. We don't just have the service gateway either. We've got the service nanny. We've got NOS. Build your product into any of those. Talk to the people on those teams, because we want to make everything that easy. We want everything to be practically free if you're using the appropriate infrastructure. So come talk to us about your product. Let's talk about getting your functionality to everybody just automatically. All right. TLDR, let's wrap it up. What's the bottom line here? First off, and most importantly, you need to actually do your integration process at least once, but really you need to do it a bunch of times. At each step, ask yourself, how did I know to do that? How can I make that step easier? How can I eliminate that step completely? And you don't stop doing that until it's so easy that even an artichoke could do it, because let's be honest, we're all artichokes sometimes.